Hello everyone, this is the third lesson in personal pronouns and verbs, and in this lesson we'll talk about verbs. We will talk specifically about simple present tense verbs, and this is the basic form of verbs. Let's come back to our previous example of Alex drinks tea. As we know, the verb here is drinks, and this verb here is used to describe something that is happening now. This means that Alex is drinking tea in this moment. This is one of the uses of simple present tense verbs. Let's take a look at another example. To describe this image, we can say Alex loves flowers, and the verb in this case is loves. The verb here is used to state a fact about Alex, that she loves flowers, and this is the second use of simple present tense verbs. Now let's take a third example. To describe this image, we can say Sam runs daily. The verb here is runs, and runs here describe an action that happens regularly. This means that Sam runs every single day, and this happens again and again and again each day. Now these are the three main uses for simple present tense verbs that we will discuss in this lesson. An action that's happening now, to state a fact, or an action happening regularly. And there are other uses, but we will not discuss them here. Let's now see how to use simple present tense verbs in a sentence, or learn about their conjugation. To do this, we'll use the new verb talk as an example. First, we need to use the root form of the verb. In our case, it's still the same word, talk. And then we need to add either an S or ES or IES if needed, and this depends on the personal pronoun we're using or the type of verb that we're using. Let's take some examples. We can say, I talk, and there is no S here. And then we can say, he talks, and we have seen that we have added an S here. Let's look at the rules for conjugation. So when conjugating a verb, we only focus on subjective pronouns and not objective pronouns. And the only subjective pronouns that needs an S, ES, or IES are third-person singular subjective pronouns. This means I can say he talks, she talks, and it talks. Now let's use the simple present tense verbs in simple sentences. The verb eat, to use it in a sentence, we can say, she eats cereal, and eats here has an S. This is because she is a subjective third-person personal pronoun. Let's look at another example. Play, to use it in a sentence, we can say, they play, and play here doesn't have an S, ES, or IES because the personal pronoun is not third-person singular subjective pronoun. And lastly, the verb write, to use it in a sentence, we can say, I write. Again, there's no an S because I is a singular subjective pronoun, but not third person, it's first person. Now let's look at an example of verbs that needs ES or IES. We have this new verb, which is go. In a sentence, we can say, I go to school every day. And notice here, we don't add anything because I is a singular first-person subjective pronoun. Now, if I want to use he instead of I have to change the verb. I have to say, he goes to school every day, and we have added ES in this case. Let's now see when do we use ES and IES with simple present tense verbs. For verbs ending with O, we have to add ES to the end of the word. Like we've seen with go, it became goes. Let's take another example with the verb watch. We say you watch TV, and we don't add an ES because you is not a third-person singular subjective pronoun. But if we want to use she, we have to add it. As the example, she watches TV. So watch doesn't end with an O, and this is the second rule. Verbs that end with an S, SH, CH, X, or Z we need to add es, and watch ends with ch, so watch becomes watches. Let's look at the third rule with the verb study. We can say, I study English, but if we want to change it to a third person singular subjective pronoun, we have to change it to ies. We say, he studies English. And this is the third rule. If a verb ends with y, we have to add ies. As we saw, study became studies. This is a short summary for when using verbs with a third-person singular personal pronoun. As we said with most verbs, we use s, but there are some cases where we use es or ies. For es, we use it with verbs ending with the letter o, like go becomes goes, and with verbs ending with the letters s, sh, ch, x, and z. As we saw, watch becomes watches. And then we use ies with verbs ending with the letter y. As we saw, study became studies. So now we'll learn about one of the most used simple present tense verbs, and those are to be. To be verbs are used almost in everyday speech, but they're a bit different than the verbs that we have learned before because their form changes depending on the personal pronoun that we use. Let's look at an example. To describe this picture, we can say, she is a teacher. The verb here is, and this is one of the forms of to be verb. Let's take another example to make things clearer. I am a teacher. If I'm talking about myself, the verb becomes am instead of is. Let's take a third example. They are students. If we're talking about all of the other personal pronouns, we use are. And these three forms are the forms of to be verb. Now, we use the am form with first person singular pronouns, which is, in this case, only I. Are form, we use it with all of the other personal pronouns except the third person singular pronouns. And the is form, we use it with third person singular pronoun. Thank you for listening. This was the end of lesson 3.